Hello, good morning. Welcome to the AI Infra Forum. This is Charles Fan. I'm co-founder CEO of MemVerge, and here I welcome John Roese, Global CTO and Chief AI Officer of Dell. Welcome, John.
Yeah, great to be here, Charles.
Yeah, would you like to start by just introducing yourself and what do you do at Dell?
Sure. I am currently the Global Chief Technology Officer for Dell, which means I own the overall technology strategy, incubation, advanced technology, a number of things on the broad surface area that is Dell. But about 9 months ago, I also picked up the responsibility to be the Chief AI Officer, which is really the responsibility to make Dell customer zero of aggressive adoption of AI within our enterprise. So I have the distinct pleasure of being my own customer, which is always fun. So.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So now you are both the vendor and the customer.
Yep.
So, so which of the two roles that is more exciting to you?
It depends on the time of day long term, obviously being the CTO of a company like Dell has been pretty fascinating. We are going through yet another technology inflection. But honestly, right now, what I will tell you in the AI world is things are moving incredibly fast. You will not keep up by just reading about it. It is incredibly important that you have hands-on keyboard and that you are engaged in actually working with these technologies. And so as a CTO, you can sometimes take your time and learn about things, but in the AI cycle, you've got to be involved in its actual application. And so having, a company like Dell with, massive scale, but a willingness to adopt these technologies early is giving us, significant insights that we would never be able to achieve by just kind of observing it from the outside. So yeah, and my advice to anyone, if you really want to understand AI, roll your sleeves up, build your first agent, implement a RAG-based chatbot, do something. It
Yeah,
will surprise you. And by the way, what surprised you this week, 3 weeks from now, the next project you do will surprise you again. Yeah. So they're both important, but I think the most exciting one right now is being up to my eyeballs in actual implementation of AI in a giant multinational company.
yeah. And I've been following you on YouTube, and I've heard your 2025 predictions. And one of them is it'll be a big year for enterprise AI, where it's going from POCs to actual productions. And where do you think Dell is and a typical enterprise is in this journey?
Well, two different answers there, but so we're in year three of the Gen AI cycle. It doesn't seem like it's that long, but it's been 3 years, or in the third year since ChatGPT.
Right.
Year one was largely a lost year. It was ideation. There weren't enough tools. You couldn't do much in an enterprise. You could play, but it was not a useful year other than thinking about the art of the possible. Year two, you could actually do stuff, but the problem is you had to do it yourself. There were no real off-the-shelf tools. You couldn't really consume technology. You were given kind of the raw bag of parts, and then you had to kind of put it together in some way. And what that meant is that early AI adoption was limited to only gigantic companies. I mean, at Dell, we built a lot of this stuff ourselves. We did not want to build it. It's not valuable to build it, but if there's no other source of supply, you do. So now we're in year three, and one of the things that's changed, and that's why my prediction was this is a year that's likely to see acceleration in the AI adoption in enterprises, is there are just far more off-the-shelf tools, whether it's low-level tools like what you guys do, or whether it's high-level tools like the Coheres and H2Os. And, there's just a lot of people that have now gotten kind of reasonably mature enterprise-grade AI packages out that aren't one-offs. They're platforms, and they're actually reasonably stable. And so, two things have to be true for enterprise adoption to occur. The first is they have to have something to consume because they don't want to build it all themselves. They like, using technology that's available to them and not incurring technical debt. And the second is most enterprises don't want to be first. And one of the reasons why Dell leaned so hard into being customer zero and moving fast, even if it wasn't as easy, was that now we have gotten over the finish line and we have roughly 100,000 people in the company that their roles have materially changed because of the adoption of AI projects in the company. We have examples. We can show you how a coding assistant works at scale, or how a content engine works, or how you transform your supply chain, or how you make services better. And the fact that somebody else has done it early is a confidence builder for the next enterprise and the next. So the fact is we have now better tools and a lot of archetypes out there that have gotten kind of over the finish line and achieved a real ROI. And whenever you have those two things,
Yeah,
the fast following in the enterprise starts to accelerate, which is a good thing.
yeah, yeah. And what are the first killer apps you see, the areas where it's making real impact?
Yeah, I mean, well, remember, here's my definition of enterprise AI. It's really boring. It's the application of AI to your most impactful processes in the most important parts of your business to improve your productivity. That's a very boring definition, but it's very accurate. It's not AGI, it's not ASI, it's not all that sexy, but it is really about picking the places where you can bend the curve on your process to make your company better. And so we've actually seen some patterns here. If you really want to achieve ROI, some of the big ones that are definitely showing up. If you write software, coding assistants are a no-brainer now.
Mhm.
A year ago, it was considered bleeding edge. Today, you'd be nuts to have a software development organization that is not embracing a coding assistant of some flavor. It reduces not low value work. It improves code quality. It basically speeds up your your ability to drain your backlog. The coding assistant space is moving quite fast. There are early ones that have worked really well. There's a bunch of new ones that have come out. But the bottom line is that's definitely a killer app. If you're a software organization and you're not using a coding assistant or don't have a plan to do it aggressively, you're kind of on the wrong side of history. The second one is around services and support and decision making. And so there's this high level term, and we have actually a project called this in Dell called Next Best Action, which basically is saying, look, anywhere that you want to give the right answer to a question, maybe to solve a troubleshooting problem or fix an issue, it turns out that the application of AI up and down that stack has profound impacts. Whether it's digitizing your telemetry or your decision trees, or whether it's taking every support troubleshooting ticket you have and every piece of material and vectorizing it and putting it into an appropriate generative front end. What we've found is customers that do that, including Dell, have seen material changes in the quality of their services, the preference for digital channels, the probability of getting to the right answer. And the reason for it is really simple. It doesn't really matter what tool or interface customers use to get support. What matters is, do they get the right answer quickly? And right now, the biggest problem most companies have is, depending on which support channel you use, you might get a smart person or less smart person that you're talking to. You might get a system that's really well engineered or one that's less well engineered. If you eliminate that by basically putting an AI system behind all of it, that really is the combined wisdom of the entire company, and it shows up whether it's as an assistant in a call center or whether it's a chatbot, you suddenly are just expressing the collective wisdom of the company every time you engage. And we have seen that result in significant decreases in almost all of the metrics that you want to go down. And then most importantly, set your customer sat go up and preference for digital or automation channels improve. So that one's a killer app. The third one is around content. It's a boring space, but boy, content is a gigantic part of every enterprise. You write a lot of documents, you do a lot of stuff. And what we've realized is content isn't just about marketing. It's actually kind of the Achilles heel of sales forces. When you look at the behavior of a sales force and you discover that in that sales force, they do two things. They sell and they prepare to sell. And then maybe they do some administrative stuff. The prepare to sell part is a nightmare. The content is fragmented. They spend a lot of time organizing their thoughts, creating the material. And we've seen instances where 40% of the time of a salesperson is spent in content preparation to go to the meeting as opposed to being in the meeting. And so, if there was ever a use case for generative search and some of the newer AI techniques, it's that. And so these are all kind of boring, but when you actually take apart, your service organization, your sales organization, your engineering organization, or in the case of Dell, also our supply chain, there's processes inside of those, that fragmentation of data, imprecise interaction, variability in the user interface. All of those things are hurting you, and Gen AI tends to be a tool to fix those. And when it does, it actually bends the curve in the right way.
Yep, it offers higher quality, more content.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of, we've heard this before. It's not like these are new concepts. It's just we have a new tool, and if you apply it to have those same metrics improve in a better way,
Yeah,
it just seems kind of logical.
yeah, and the end result is higher productivity and higher competitiveness for the enterprise.
Exactly. That's enterprise AI. It's
Yes,
all about
yes.
productivity. It's how do you bend the curve on productivity with these technologies? And
Yep,
if you do, it's good.
yep. That makes sense. And obviously, the most important underpinning of all this is large language model.
Yep.
And in the last, I guess, 2.5 years, since we've seen ChatGPT 3, um, mostly I imagine so far, uh, most enterprises will go to the Frontier Labs API services
Yep.
uh, to query the large language model. But also in the more recent months, we've seen some pretty impressive progress in the open source side. Now, if we look at the to the near future, do you think how much of the queries do you think will be going to the API
Well,
services? How much will be going to the, on top of the infrastructure that the enterprise set up themselves?
here's an example. Dell, very large global multinational company, we don't use any API
Wow.
models. It is 100% open models deployed in our environment under our control.
Wow.
And we have a deep relationship with people like Meta. They have some fantastic work, but there's a lot more out there. There's Mixtral and Mistral, and there's very good tools, and they're becoming more prevalent.
Yeah.
The API tools are interesting, but the problem we have with them for enterprise use is, and it doesn't mean, let me back up a bit. There are enterprise use cases where the data is not confidential at all. It's public data in a
Yeah.
public setting. And if the economics work, fine, go use those. It's not a problem. But the minute you start talking about private or confidential data, or that you have a regulatory or compliance obligation to achieve the right outcome, it's very difficult to deal with an API interface like that, because that interface it looks like a black box of magic. There's no way to see inside of it. You can't tune it. You can't change it. You might be able to do some configuration on top of it, but it's not really part of your end-to-end system. And so when we start talking about the real core processes of an enterprise, it's very hard to use those tools because you just don't have the ability to control, see them, understand them, and regulate them the way you would if the model was running on your environment. I mean, DeepSeek is a great example of that. If you're concerned about DeepSeek for geopolitical reasons, or concerned about its behavior, one way to mitigate that is don't run it through the API.
Right.
Download the model, run it in your data center, put your constraints around it, and you are in control. It turns out that model is extremely important to enterprises. Like I said, there's low-hanging fruit that the APIs are fine for. In fact, in things like computer use right now, there's some early testing and prototyping around computer use agents that the API tools are probably better. It'll never take off in the enterprise unless it can be consumed as an open model in a private environment. That's a statement from me that I think is a fact,
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of scale. Yeah.
Yeah, clearly, I think that's a key challenge for enterprise in adopting AI is how do you combine
Yeah.
the state-of-art models with the proprietary data you have and do it
Exactly.
securely and seamlessly. You know,
Yep.
and where do you see some of the gaps existing in making this work? Whether it's fine-tuning or whether it's RAG, there are
Yeah.
various techniques in doing this.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to answer because there's gaps everywhere, but it depends on the technology. Like let's take RAG-based chatbots. I actually feel like they're in really good shape. We've been using RAG-based chatbots for quite a while, probably 2 years now. Now we use more ones that are off the shelf, kind of commercial products. The bottom line is, RAG is what it is. It's not the most efficient system. You have to take primary data, vectorize it, as the large language model is going through its gyrations, it has to pause and kind of go get other vectorized data and then kind of combine it and then continue on its journey. So from an inference performance perspective, data in a model versus data through a RAG, the data through the RAG is quite a bit less efficient. Now, it's not a big deal. Enterprises have the capacity to do this, but I feel like that one, there's not a lot of gaps. I mean, we have decent security controls. The automation pipelines are pretty good. Vector databases are what they are. There's some good ones, some bad ones. I think we're okay there.
Mhm.
Where we get into the gaps, are when we start talking about things like agentic, where we say, I'm not actually going to just use a RAG-based chatbot with a static data set. I'm going to have a set of these things called agents, which are autonomous entities that can work as an ensemble. And instead of them just consuming static data, they're all based in sharing a knowledge graph. And that knowledge graph is dynamic data. We give them data, but then they create connections and relationships. And they're constantly evolving. Once you get into that mode, which is a fascinating space, where your agents aren't just unlocking the value of your proprietary data, they're actually digitizing a skill that human beings do that somebody's actually performing into an AI system. That opens up a whole realm of open questions. The biggest right now, to be very blunt, and maybe in 6 months this won't be a problem, but right now is while agents are doable, we built our first autonomous agents a year ago. We feel very comfortable with the technology. It does work. However, there is no standard for interworking.
Yeah.
There is no agreement on how do you authenticate an agent, how do you authorize an agent, how do you share a knowledge graph. There's some agreements on using the OpenAI API for JSON. There's some agreements around MCP and some other things, but we have a system where agents by themselves are like having a single employee in a room with a lock on it. That's
Yeah.
not very useful. But imagine if you have a collection of agents that can actually work together. Imagine even better that that collection of agents can interact with other organizations or other companies or your customers. What is the dilemma there? Well, you have to have interworking. You have to have standards around this. It's got to be trust relationships. We haven't figured that out yet as an industry. I think we will, but it's interesting. We're very hyped up on this idea of agents, but yet using them outside of your walled garden in very constrained ways is kind of a bit of a crapshoot right now because there aren't any standards for it. So I think we have some challenges there. I think the other challenge we have obviously is in the large language and small language model space because fundamentally, while these are good and they continue to improve, they have behaviors in them. Even with agentic, we discovered that sometimes your choice of model you use isn't about the capability. It's about its ability to play well with others. And we found certain models, when you put them into an agentic ensemble, they stomp all over the other people. They're kind of jerks, is a good way to describe it, in the team. And so we have a lot of things to learn about what is a good model, not just a good model in a vacuum, but a good model in the context of production. And then the last thing I'd leave you with in terms of gaps is because of agentic and because of small language models and because of AI PCs where I can actually run things locally, this need for specialized models is growing. And it's brought us back to this concept of fine tuning, which we weren't really doing a lot in the enterprise. But now as we look forward, we actually see fine tuning infrastructures as kind of necessary for the enterprise because that's how you're going to instantiate these kind of specialized models that maybe represent a specific digital skill in an agentic framework or in a process. And so we're going to have to think about the idea that even if you use open models, you may in fact modify them and you'll have to run them through their life cycle. And so you're not doing the foundational training, but you're going to have a lot of kind of ongoing fine tuning and implementations around models through their life cycle, which a year ago, I didn't think we'd have to do that because it was all RAG. Now it's not all RAG. There's agents, there's fine-tuning infrastructure, there's small language models. All of that gives us, a bit more complexity in the infrastructure, but it gives us a whole lot more capability. So it's kind of worth doing.
That's fascinating. So in your vision, you see maybe instead of one gigantic model rule them all, but could be multiple models, each
Yeah.
specialized in a particular area.
Yeah, I don't believe that the enterprise is on a journey to AGI or ASI anytime soon. I think other people are trying to get there in the consumer space. And I think the first places you'll see these kind of human equivalent, broad functional things are probably in search engines or marketing, but they're not going to be in the enterprise because they're not going to be precise enough. They're going to be kind of error prone, very good generalists. And there's lots of places for that. That's not the enterprise. And so in the enterprise, it really drives down to, look, I care about performance and I care about functionality and I care about trust. And I don't see a path in the near term to get that within a single model in all domains at an enterprise grade level of functionality. So that inevitably moves you towards more specialized models, more fine tuning, segregating the data with things like RAGs and knowledge graphs. All of those tools are going to get you to a level of precision. There's a difference between, randomly writing a poem on a website and deciding if somebody has cancer. These are not the same thing. And so one of them requires a bit more level of precision and control. And by the way, the thing that detects cancer would be wasting CPU cycles if it could also write poetry. So pruning and optimization and quantization techniques are also very useful. So it's just, there's a lot of difference between the different use cases. But once you get to the enterprise, there isn't a clear AGI, ASI for enterprise anytime soon. When we figure out on the consumer side, maybe a decade later, we'll have it that can do enterprise stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially given enterprise has mountains of proprietary data. You could overload
Yep.
a particular model with fine tuning to create a special model just for that.
Yep.
And this could work in combination, maybe of a more general model to.
Absolutely. Well, it's an interesting point. Most enterprises, including Dell, have hundreds of petabytes of data inside of our firewalls.
Yeah.
Do you understand what that means? The training of GPT-3, I think, was 10 terabytes. And we have hundreds of petabytes sitting
Right.
in our four walls as one
Yeah.
enterprise. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of data in the enterprise that hasn't been fully unlocked, that will be unlocked. And whether it's just to express it via RAG and chatbots, or whether it's to power agents, there's a lot in front of us. This idea that we've run out of data. Sure, you've run out of data in Wikipedia and the public internet. You have not even touched the data that's within an enterprise. And by the way, I'm never going to give you my data because that's my secret sauce, but I'm going to use it. And that really is the market opportunity when you
Yeah.
think about the enterprise.
Yeah, yeah, I think that that's a big opportunity. That essentially you have these specialized models that need to be fine-tuned or trained with proprietary data. There'll be a
Yep.
continued advancement in the RAG space. And when you have these AI agents, as you mentioned, there could be a shared knowledge graph or shared context
Exactly.
that they need to be able to communicate with each other. Uh,
Well, it's a good point, though. Something for people to think about. If you ask what an agent is at the end, meaning when we're all done, we have agents and they all work well, what are they? And sometimes we think of them as digital skills, and that's true. But I get excited is when you think about them as APIs. When you ask, well, what is the best way for two AI-enabled companies to talk to each other? Over a classical hard API or by email. No, it's my agent will talk to your agent. That's why interworking is so important. But that is a fascinating way to think about it because, I mean, you've been doing software for a long time. Remember, we used to have like dumb APIs, and then Netflix came out with smart APIs in like the cloud native space. So you could actually have some code inside of them.
yeah,
Agents are like that on steroids. They're code that thinks. They're code that has an ability to reason and can do interesting things. And imagine if that's the API, it really does transform how the end-to-end processes work in the enterprise and on a global scale. So,
yeah,
pretty exciting stuff. By the way, if you're in the infrastructure business, one thing that we do know is the inference performance of an agentic environment is orders of magnitude more demanding than a chatbot, a RAG-based chatbot. It
yeah.
requires a lot of compute. It requires a lot of transactions and a lot of data, which, from a Dell perspective, we're pretty happy about. But from a, market perspective, we have to plan for that. We have to have efficient infrastructure that can ultimately run this stuff well because the demand's only going up.
Yep, yep. So that's actually related to my last question, which is going to the infrastructure space. As we know, GPU is the core of compute for this AI world. And do you see enterprises use infrastructure from the public cloud, or you see a trend there are more people, getting GPU clusters on-prem, or there's
Yeah.
some combination of the two?
It's a combination of it. I think the multi-cloud world carries over into AI, but I think it pivots harder towards private infrastructure. And the reason being is, a cloud workload in the old days, was the best workload to put in a cloud is one that's kind of ephemeral. It bursts, it's sometimes on, sometimes off. It's kind of as a service. That's great. That's not an AI workload. Most AI workloads, once you figure out a high value workload and put it into production, it just kind of runs, and it runs fast and at high performance. And so the economics of some of the cloud architectures doesn't quite hunt well. And so most people, even in conventional workloads, they put things into public clouds and then they repatriate the ones that they can save a lot of money and run efficiently into co-location or a private environment. We see the same pattern with enterprise, except they haven't put things in public clouds. They're uncomfortable with the tool chains. They're doing experimentation. They're not sure they're in the right place because their data might not be there, or they don't want to lose control. And so we really haven't seen the enterprise take off. When we talk to enterprise customers, what they tell us is they're experimenting with the cloud services, and they'll probably use them for certain things. But most of the big AI projects in like healthcare, manufacturing, retail actually aren't in the data center. They're in the store or the hospital or the factory, which is an edge play, which is not a public cloud discussion. And so you tend to see a very hybridized environment. There are things you should do in a public cloud, and there are things you should do in a private data center or in a co-location site or at the edge or even on the device. And one thing I tell people is, look, I can't give you an absolute answer about exactly the right topology, but what I can tell you is do not treat it casually. This is a wonderful time to have a strategic discussion about where do I actually think this is going to be run and what am I going to need, because it isn't the same answer when you were hybridizing VMware or hybridizing your SAP environment or putting a database into a cloud. This is a totally different workload with a totally different data set and a totally different economic and technology model. And so like I said, for Dell, by the way, almost all of our workloads run in private infrastructure on-prem. We get really, really good efficiencies out of it. I'll give you one statistic. Our coding assistant, which is tens of thousands of software developers, runs on less than 10 GPUs in our data center.
Wow.
Okay? Yeah. And I'm not even sure we've optimized it enough. So yes, that doesn't sound like a big demand, except if you think about, thousands of enterprises with thousands of coding assistants, and that's just one workload out of hundreds of workloads. But enterprise use cases, when you do them properly, they do not require thousands of GPUs. They require a very specific amount of capacity because they just run really fast almost all the time. And if you put them in the right place, it can be a very predictable cost structure, and it can be a very controllable environment, which is kind of where we think people will gravitate towards. But it absolutely will be hybrid, and there will be multiple clouds, and there will be on-prem and edges. It's just, this is a great time to pause and not just blindly go down that path. Have a strategic discussion. Really think about it, and you'll discover that you want to put the workload in the right place with the right economics, the right performance, the right control framework, and you have lots of choices about where to do that.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very interesting field of opportunities to build the right AI infrastructure solutions, both in system hardware as well as in software, to support enterprises to deploy their
Absolutely.
infrastructure. Well, I think we are at our time. It's a great pleasure. It was a great conversation with you, John. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, glad to be here, Charles. Great to keep the dialogue going. It's going to be a welcome to year 3 of the next 20 years of our life.
Yes, year 3 of the next 20 years of our life. That's a great way to sum it up. All right, thank you, John.
Okay, great. Thanks.